Welcome back, and for today's Photoshop tutorial, I'm going to be dealing with illustration. Now, there are a lot of good tutorials out there about digital painting, and you can see all sorts of good things there. I'm going to go about it a little bit of a different approach and show other tools you can use in combination with it. And we're going to start with this image right here. So if I'm going to illustrate something like this item and it already has these hard smooth edges and things which are even circular or geometric, I'm actually going to start off with the vector shapes. And so what we have right down here is we have Photoshop's vector tools. We see we've got the pen tool, and you have all the things you should recognize from Illustrator. Here's the type tool, and here are your vector selection tools. Just like Illustrator has selection and direct selection, we can't really call it a selection tool in Photoshop because that would confuse us with other selection tools, but we have path selection and direct selection working just like in Illustrator. And here are the tools that we have for making vector shape layers. Now, if you use these tools, what you want to make sure is that up here, your option is set to shape, and that will create a shape layer. Your other options are path and pixels, and honestly, these really aren't that useful at all. So always make sure it says shape up here. And you can create vector shape layers and then edit them and do all sorts of things with them. And that's what I'm going to show you today as I start on this type of illustration and just how they can be implemented into a digital painting. So right here, for example, we've got, I'll start off with one shape layer. Here's my first shape layer that I made. And so if you're going to illustrate an object, you kind of want to figure out how you should divide up into layers. So I'm going to get my path selection tool and click on this layer, and you can see the actual paths that I've created. And here's one that I did just with the ellipse tool. And then these other ones were created with the pen tool. And you don't actually have to create everything in one path. You can have various different shapes here on one layer, and they'll all combine and look like they're one. Now, the thing to know is that on a vector shape layer, you can only have one color. You can have multiple shapes, and you can move them around like this, but it all has to be one color. Because what's really happening is this one layer is filled with a solid color, like any layer in Photoshop, and these are actually acting as vector paths to show just the inside of that path. Now, I've done a few other things here that we'll talk about. Is I'm using some layer styles. In this case, I've got an inner shadow, and the inner shadow gives me a little bit of an edge right along here for the plane. And I'm using an inner glow, and just to show what I like to say a lot. Glows don't have to be bright and shadows don't have to be dark. In this case, I've actually picked the same color as my fill, but I've changed it to multiply. And that gives me just a little bit of a darkening around the edge, makes things look a little bit realistic, a little bit more worn right there. So again, change the blending mode of your glows to make them dark. By the same approach, you can take a drop shadow or any other kind of shadow and change the blending mode from multiplied to a brightening blending mode, and you can make it bright or kind of a glow. And a little bit of gradient overlay, so it's a little darker on this side and a little bit lighter on this side over here. So if I turn those off, we have that. If I turn these on, we have this right here. And what I'm trying to do is just use the tools within Photoshop to do a lot of the work for me so I don't have to illustrate every single thing. The other nice thing about working with vector shapes and with these layer styles is that they are resolution independent. So if I had to size this up, which you don't like to, you don't want to, but sometimes you have to do things like that, these edges will all remain perfectly crisp and clear. And the layer styles will scale up as well. And so if I do any digital painting, and I do have some painting here, here's a shadow layer right there, see that? And that's just the paintbrush and just painting pixels on a layer, but I'm using this bottom layer as a clipping mask. And so what that means is that these of course will have to scale up, and they will lose some quality, but the edge will remain nice and sharp. So I've got another set of shapes right here for the tail fins, because they're obviously a separate part from the main part of the plane, and they kind of stick up and out. And I've made them one shade darker there in the color. So you just kind of want to figure out how you want to divide things up, and that'll help you out here. In this case, I'm using my main vector layer as a clipping mask. I've got an underside right here, which is also a vector shape layer built with the pen tool, and it goes along right there. And then I've got a details layer right here to show the flaps and various parts of the plane. And these, of course, as you see, also have a little bit of layer styles on them: bevel and emboss, stroke, and inner glow. Of course, it's dark, and it's giving the look right there. The next one, I've got some panels here. So again, you can see that's built with the pen tool, making kind of simple polygons. And we've got some other panels right here, and just adding a bit more layer styles on them to make this effect look. So if I look like this, so if I were to click a point and move it, all the effects would update with it. And we'll kind of move along here. There are some little circular shapes here, and I've got some lines added there. And then here's my shadow layer on top, and of course the shadow layer is in multiply mode. Now I'm going to do a good bit of painting right here on this whole surface to give it highlights and shadows and paint all the details and all that. But the nice thing that's happening here again is that I'm building all these straight lines and hard edges with vector tools as much as possible before I get into the painting. So I'll zoom in here to 100% size on this. And the thing is, you'll never be able to get an edge that's this sharp and crisp by using a paintbrush. So if you're wanting to paint some sort of artificial object with really sharp edges, using a vector shape layer as your main layer, as a clipping mask for all your painting, is a great way to go about that. And what I'm going to do here is show you a little bit about how I would approach that in a project like this. Now I've got this this background image that I'm working from. There's the photo. And just to see what's going on here, I'm going to take and tile both of these. There we go. So we'll tile both, and I kind of zoom in and see what's going on here. And so we'll kind of take a look at the nose of the plane here and work on this, which is called a pitot tube or probe. So I'll go over to my illustration, zoom in here, and for something like this, I want to work nice and tight, maybe even 200%, so I can see what I'm doing there. Another thing that's interesting is that if you have all of these layers and they're clipped to this main layer here, if I take my opacity down of that main layer that's acting as the clipping mask, all the other layers will go down in opacity as well. And so now I can see through them and see what I can do about this item right here. So here's where I'm working from, and here's my photo. And what I'll do is just click on a layer on top of this. I'm going to start a new vector shape layer. So I'm going to come to my foreground color and choose a color that I want to work with. And so I've been using this Pantone color here as the main basis for the plane because it really closely matches what I see here. And then I can go down for darker shadows and darker areas and go up for highlight areas. But I'm choosing this one as kind of a mid-tone for it. And when you're working with a shape layer, a vector shape layer, what you have here with your foreground color will generally be what it fills with. But you can always easily change that. So as I look at this, I'm going to see what do I want to make this shape here, I might actually start off with the line tool. And we see there's the weight, it says 10 pixels, and that'll probably be good for now. We'll see what happens. So I'm just going to drag and pull a line right here, and that's actually not bad. That'll work. Now, something interesting to know about the line tool, and you see it's made a brand new shape layer. The line tool in Photoshop is that Photoshop doesn't like open paths. So even though this is a line tool and I could take it down to one pixel, so it's a very thin weight, it's actually not an open path. It's not a line segment tool like in Illustrator. It's making a long rectangle. And so if I get the direct select tool, I can actually click on these various little points and edit it, because again, it's a filled closed path, not an open path with a stroke. So I'm kind of fine-tuning this here. And if I'm having a hard time seeing through it, I can always just adjust the opacity of that layer. And no matter how much I take it down to see through it, I can still actually see the vector lines here. So I'm going to click on these points with the direct select tool and just do a little bit of point editing. And this is really exactly like what would happen if you were building some shape like this in Illustrator. Now what I'm noticing here is that with these straight lines, it's not quite working. I want a very sort of sharp tip here, but the line of this part of this probe on the plane isn't quite straight. Looks like it has a tiny bit of curve to it. So in that case, what I would do is I'm going to come here to the convert tool, just like in really any vector program. I'm going to click and drag this point there to give myself some Bezier handles. And I'll click and drag this one to give myself some Bezier handles. And now I've curved it just a little bit. Now it kind of matches there with the actual shape. Now the thing I'm trying to decide here is what to do with the rest of this as I look at this right here. And I think I'll just kind of continue and do a little bit more here. So again, get the direct select tool, and I'm going to pull this path, pull it down kind of to here. Again, what I'm trying to do is think of what would be a good way to build this shape. So I think I'm going to add a little bit to this. So I'm going to come down here and maybe get my ellipse tool. Now the way to add to a shape layer, I want to have multiple shapes on this one shape layer, as opposed to make a brand new one, is to add to a selection or to kind of add to anything, you want to hit the shift key. So as I hit the shift key, I get a plus sign. And so if I pull now, my ellipse is going to make a perfect circle, which I don't want. But now I think I will let go of the shift key and I can adjust and move this ellipse right where I need it to go. Now it's actually not quite what I want. I'd like to actually rotate it. I think that would look a little better, but I can't rotate it right now. I just have to make it. Okay, so there it is. But now I want to maybe transform this particular shape independently of this one. The way I would do that is with the path selection tool. Make sure I've got that path selected. And I'm going to hit Command T or Control T on the PC for transform, free transform. And now see, I'm transforming just that shape. So I'm going to rotate it. And because it's kind of small, I might zoom in a little more. There we go. And just kind of put it into position right about there. And I can sort of stretch it out here. I can even do a skew and kind of pull this end out a bit. And then scale. Make sure I'm scaling disproportionately. There we go. And just kind of pull this bit out like this. And maybe I will skew this point up just a little bit there. And there we go. I'm kind of fine-tuning that to sort of be what I'm looking for here. Maybe a little bit of skew kind of right out there. It's tough to tell exactly what's going on here, but this will be close enough. All right, now I've added that shape there. And just to show you how you can continue modifying shapes, you should be familiar with working with vector tools and the pen tool and all that from Illustrator, and those types of things can go right on over into Photoshop. So if I get the pen tool I can actually add a point right here, and I can add a point right there. And now, if I click that point, I can move it down just where I want to have kind of right there. There we go. Just like that. That's looking pretty good. And even with the convert tool, if I wanted to be able to adjust these handles independently, once again, the convert tool, grab this handle for the Bezier curve and kind of pull it up a little bit. So really important stuff to know for doing some types of digital illustration. All right, so that's looking pretty good there. That's the overall shape I'm looking for. Now let's kind of see what other things that I could do with this. So there we go. I'll name this layer. And looking and seeing kind of what's going on here with it, I'm going to try and use some layer styles to help me out with this, so that I don't have to paint everything. And as I'm looking at this, I'm trying to see, you know, what do we have that would help with this. And so I'm going to just double click right here on the layer. And I think the first thing I might do, it almost looks like it gets a little bit darker toward the end. And I'm going to do for that a gradient overlay. And actually it'd be easier if I took the, there we go. If I took the blending or the opacity to 100% so I can see what I'm doing. All right, so here is my gradient overlay. And I think I'll actually use my foreground color there, and we'll just do a linear gradient. There we go. And you can see that's kind of going darker to light right there. And you can adjust the angle of it, and you can also adjust what's called the scale, and that's sort of just how soft and diffuse it is, how long it takes to fade from one color to another. I really, for my gradients, almost always tend to use foreground to transparent. And that's what you see right there. All right, so that's looking pretty good. Now you can do some additional effects as well. Anyone that has a plus sign, you can add one to it. So what I think I might try here is to actually do another gradient overlay. I'm going to hit the plus sign, and there's my second one. And for this one, I'm going to make it a reflected gradient and take it like that. And I'm going to try and rotate it so that it matches. There we go. See that? Rotate it so it sort of matches the angle of this this item here. So we're kind of getting a little bit on both sides, like that. There we go. A little something like that. And you can also try some things like, I'm going to try an inner shadow. And so an inner shadow, I like to always use color other than black. And if it's a daytime scene, dark blue works well. So there's that. Well, let's take these down. Crazy, crazy. Okay. So watch what I can do with an inner shadow. I'll move that up a little bit. Oh, there we go. See? Putting like a little bit of an edge right there. The size is 0, so it's a very, very hard edge. But if I take and up a little bit, there I can actually soften it a bit. I'll take that distance down just kind of a little bit right there. And I can just adjust the angle and make that be a little more I'm looking for. Actually, that's looking pretty good. Redistance up just a bit. So what you can see now is that with this, I've already got the look that it's rounded, and it's a bit rounded, and I got some dimension to it, and not just that it's flat, but I will use this layer as a clipping mask, and I will paint some some details and things on top of it. But with this right here, I've already got a good bit going, just so that I have a bit less to do there. So anyway, that's looking pretty good. And I will say okay, right, for that. That's looking all right there. And I'll paint in the extra details that I see on that. Another thing I'm seeing right here is sort of this circular area that it's mounted into. And so let's try something like that. So I'm going to go back here on my main body right here, and because it's going to be part of this, main plane shape. And for this one, obviously, it's going to be an ellipse. So get the ellipse tool, and I'll just pull and drag and do an ellipse here. Now, the best way to do a circle in perspective is actually make a full circle and then transform and skew and rotate it a little bit. So yeah, I might try that. So here's my circle. That's pretty good, but it doesn't quite match what's happening right there. So again, I'm going to transform that. I made a brand new layer for that. That's okay. So I'm going to transform that, rotate it kind of like this here, and then I'm going to kind of skew and pull that in a little bit like that. Maybe scale, pull it right down. So you can see just how easy it is to work with vector shapes like this, really much more so than if they were pixels. You just have a lot more flexibility with these kinds of things. So I'm going to take my main layer that everything is clipped to and take the opacity up so we can see how everything looks. Okay, now, great. So let's take a look at this new ellipse that I made. And I'm going to show a few things here with this. Again, I'm trying to make it look like this right here. So I'm going to double click on that, and I'm going to give it a bit of a bevel and emboss, right? So a little bevel and emboss right there, and here's our bevel and emboss, and we'll have to change these, of course. I'll do color dodge, and I will do multiply. I like to do color dodge instead of screening sometimes for things that are really shiny and metallic. That can look really good. And so I'm going to grab that. All right, so there's the bevel and emboss on that. I want to see which one looks good. Right now it's an inner bevel. I'm going to do an emboss. Okay, that's a bit better. We'll try down. Ooh, hey, now we're starting to get somewhere. Can you see that? We've got kind of that darker edge right there, and there's a little highlight happening. So that's some pretty cool stuff. I might take and change the angle just a little bit. There we go. And now here's the important thing when you're working with layer styles. This shape already has its own fill, as everyone will. And if I go up to my blending and I have my opacity, and you take the opacity down, you take down the opacity of everything. See, now everything is transparent, including the layer styles. But if you take the fill opacity down and leave opacity, watch as I do that, I'm taking down the opacity of whatever that layer is filled with, and it actually leaves the layer styles. So that's why you've got on your layers, you've got opacity and fill. That's a difference right there. So I'm going to do a little bit more on this. I actually do like to do very often a little bit of an inner glow on that. And let's make this multiply. And I'm going to use the same color as the rest of my plane there. And watch as I take the size up here. Oh, look at that. That's looking pretty good. It's way too dark, so I'll take the opacity down. I'm getting some good stuff happening there. Maybe even way down. Very often this sort of inner glow and outer glow is nice, but just really, really subtle. So kind of with a low opacity. I think I'll even do an outer glow. As I mentioned, of course, your glows don't have to be dark, so multiply. And once again, we'll use this same color right there and take the size up. See that outer glow happening? Way, way, way too dark, but if I take it down like that, maybe even like 20%, maybe even like 15% or something, just a little hint there, and that just gives a suggestion that there's kind of something going on. There's an actual surface and there's some edge quality that collects shadow or ambient occlusion or something. So that is looking, I think, pretty good. And is getting sort of the look that I'm wanting. If I want the lines to be a little bit more definite, for example, in this highlight on that edge, I'm going to take that up a little bit more. There we go. Now I can see that edge a bit more there. And then, let's see. Oh, we've got a soften on this bevel and emboss. Let's take that soften down. Oh yeah, that's much better. Look at that. That looks pretty good right there. And so this is a kind of a standard emboss technique, is smooth. I tend to keep the depth at 100. And of course, there's your up and down. But that's looking good to me to see, sort of suggest what's happening there. And maybe this a little bit more on the shadow, but then with the inner glow, we take that down just a bit. There we go. Okay. That's a nice little addition there to what's going on. So I've just added one little bit. And so a lot of working on an image like this is just sort of creating little bits and adding as you go until you build it up. I'll follow along a bit later as we'll work on some other parts of how to make things happen on this illustration. But this is, I think, is a good way to look and see just how you can use the vector tools and layer styles to really get you going and save lots of time so you don't have to paint everything in. These tools are there for a reason, and especially if you're working commercially, they will save you lots of time and give you good results. And that's really what we're looking for with digital illustration. I hope you like this, and stay tuned for some following progress, and we'll see if we can finish up this illustration.